So in The Gay Science, also called The Joyful Wisdom, Nietzsche has the madman say, God is dead, I mean to tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. So in this lecture series, I'll outline some of the main themes in Nietzsche's writings so you can make more sense of your primary source readings. I'll also offer some general critiques of each theme that you may be interested in pursuing. These are critiques from scholars like René Girard or authors like G.K. Chesterton and more. Now, even if you come to disagree with what interpreters believe to be Nietzsche's central ideas, he's worth reading because of his stylistic genius. He's fun to read. And he also has piercing insights that are at least sometimes true. And then finally, his ability to provoke you into much deeper thought, as he did for me, and for most, though not all of his critics, is really valuable. So the first theme to study as you read Nietzsche's The Death of God. It's a central theme in Nietzsche's philosophy, the beginning of his philosophy. His claim that God is dead does not mean that Nietzsche himself killed God. Instead, he argues that the rise of science, reason, and Western culture, including Christianity, has led to God's demise. That is, the belief in God is dying in the culture and in individuals. And as people lose belief in God, everything that depended on belief in God is torn from its roots, so to speak. Now, it's interesting that Nietzsche believed that Christianity laid the groundwork for science and reason, which ultimately undermined the credibility of the Christian God. So, for example, Christianity encouraged people to seek objective truth, since God created the universe in a rational, ordered way, instead of a universe operating on blind mechanisms like survival or power. And so we can discover the order of it because God created it. And so Christians sought objective truth, knowing the ultimate objective truth was God. And also that the ultimate guarantor of objective truth is God. Also, the idea of a Christian God tells me that somebody loves me, even if all you people don't. And it tells me that every person is intrinsically valuable and a child of God. But here's the main idea at this point. When Nietzsche declares that God is dead, he's pointing to the decline or death of religious faith in modern culture and philosophy. And again, Nietzsche, like Dostoevsky, did not make the mistake of thinking that life could continue unchanged after the death of God, after most people lose religious faith. And I should say the murder of God, since we lost faith. We took him down, so to speak. Now, he grasped the profound implications of this loss of faith. So as Michael Sugrue aptly describes, Nietzsche was like a seismograph. He was sensitive to the tremors in the cultural and moral foundations that others failed to notice and still fail to notice. And again, Nietzsche believed that concepts like human rights, the intrinsic value of the individual, and common morality, often based on altruism, all of that depended upon the theological structure of Judaism and Christianity and maybe a bit of Plato, the idea of transcendence. And with the collapse of that framework, well, Nietzsche saw the gravity of the problem because what arises is a void, an abyss, a relativism, but also nihilism. And so Nietzsche wanted to help people overcome that nihilism without religion and without Plato, this worldly transcendence of the nihilism. So many of these ideas about the death of God that I just explained are captured in one of Nietzsche's more famous passages, the story of the madman. He introduces the figure of this madman wandering through a marketplace, carrying a lantern in daylight and searching for God. And this lantern, by the way, evokes the image of the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes, who was seeking a good, honest person and couldn't find one. Diogenes is a character who sleeps with the dogs. He's a cynic. He challenges all the customs of the time, overturns them, and it takes Socrates' beliefs and reasoning to their end. Likewise, the madman is doing something similar. So, in Nietzsche's account, the madman calls out to the townspeople asking, "Where is God gone? I mean to tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon?" Now notice, this is a poetic way of saying wiping away teleology, the idea of an afterlife, the future. There's no horizon, right? You're completely free, in other words, to create your own values since God is dead. So imagine this madman wandering around as you're trying to shop at the grocery store and he's talking to you. He continues, "What did we do when we loosened this earth from its sun? Whither does it now move? Whither do we move? Away from all suns? Do we not dash on unceasingly, backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and a below? Do we not stray as through infinite nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not become colder? Does not night come on continually, darker and darker? So Nietzsche, here in this passage, is describing the collapse of the foundational beliefs underpinning the lives of the townspeople and most modern people. In other words, he's talking about you and your culture. The foundation that had dissolved is God, according to him, and with it the principles once rooted in God. Now, according to Nietzsche, principles that were rooted in God that are now collapsed, so to speak, they include the intrinsic value of each person, objective morality, human rights, democracy, feminism, and even the concept of objective scientific truth. In their absence, Nietzsche presents a disorienting reality. No up, no down, as he says, right? No fixed points of reference. What remains is a world of perspectives, a disorienting relativism where there's no objective and no absolute truths that exist. There's only different interpretations and ways of being. And many of you young people are going through such a stage. You doubt or reject God, and this leads to a nihilism and a sort of disorientation. In a way, we could say you lose the freedom of looking up, which is a strange way of speaking, but think about that for a minute. You lose that freedom. There's no up or down. You're disoriented. And then how do you address this nihilism, right? Do you take the path of Nietzsche? Or do you turn to a religion, which also rejects nihilism, whereas Nietzsche tries to overcome nihilism in a different way? Well, I don't know. But here's how the madman finishes his speech. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, so that it broke in pieces and was extinguished. I come too early, he then said. I am not yet at the right time. This prodigious event is still on its way, and it is traveling. It has not yet reached men's ears. Lightning and thunder need time. The light of the stars needs time. Deeds need time, even after they are done, to be seen and heard. This deed is as yet further from them than the furthest star, and yet they have done it. It is further stated that as he walked around to the churches, he was asked to give account, and he said, "What are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and monuments of God?" And that is the story of the madman. So all of this is a long-winded way of saying that one of Nietzsche's themes is the death of God. According to Nietzsche, this loss of faith has enormous implications and can lead to a type of nihilism. And so Nietzsche wants to overcome this nihilism, but he wants to overcome it without Plato or religion. He wants to create meaning in a universe that is godless, indifferent, and cruel. His goal is to create meaning and values without adopting the transcendent ideas of the Jews, Jesus, or Plato. He wants a purely atheistic, naturalistic, this worldly way to overcome the negative consequences of nihilism. And as we shall see, his answer is not a system, but it's a kind of new existence, a new kind of existence, a new kind of human, the Superman or the Ubermensch, as we will see. Now let me add a couple of points here before moving to the criticisms of this theme, the death of God. The first point is that when you look at the madman in the town square, there are a bunch of atheists there making fun of him. So Nietzsche's idea here is that he has some deep ideas that the atheists don't understand either. They don't understand the long-term consequences of lack of belief in God and how so much is rooted in that theological structure. So it's not just the theists that don't understand, it's also the atheists. My second point is that what results is nihilism and a type of relativism. Everything becomes interpretations, no facts, no objective facts. And for Nietzsche, he wants to overcome the nihilism, but he's going to adopt the relativism and the perspectivism. It's going to be very interesting. Now, my third point is a little longer to make, but I just wanted to do a little more practical or personal example of how religion affects us in ways maybe we don't appreciate. We underestimate the power of religion. So while a new atheist might use like childhood cancer as an argument against God's existence, like an argument from evil, it's often the case that the actual child and their family is able to cope because of their religious beliefs, centered around hope, love, gratitude, and the infinite or intrinsic value of each person, which just can't be supported, and arguably at least, in a naturalistic worldview, or so Nietzsche thought. But perhaps he thought you could choose those values from strength. That's a topic we'll explore later and see if that's the case. Let me give one other example. Psychological studies on children have shown, I believe, that Children will take healthy risks and explore their environment if they feel safe and loved by their mother or their other caregiver. If they don't feel safe and loved, they cling to the adult and they don't explore and grow. Now imagine a child, or adult for that matter, who believes there is a God who loves them more than any human could, loves everyone like a powerful parent loves his kids. That's so powerful to so many people in the world, and that's gone without belief in God. The orphan or abused child now truly has nothing. And think of the types of prayer and music that are lost when one loses belief in God. So all of this is to bring it a little more down to earth, practical, psychological. People, including the new atheists, I think Nietzsche would say, underestimate the consequences of an individual losing faith, or most in a culture losing faith. Now, it doesn't mean that Nietzsche thought this was bad, and Nietzsche still thinks the death of God is good. But those are some other stories to consider. And then my last point is this. There's an anecdotal story that Nietzsche encountered a few nuns walking through a town, and the nuns asked him which of his books they should read first. But he recommended they not read him. So Nietzsche is not challenging them to an argument and trying to disprove God's existence like most atheists do nowadays. He's going to let the nuns be. He's polite. He was respectful in person, as far as I can tell, though his writings were grandiose often, right? He often said that he was writing for the few, the exceptional. He also recognized that his works were not for everyone. And in a way, that's what a true relativist must believe. So perhaps he writes most for the person who really rejects God and religion, and they're in nihilistic despair, and they understand the consequences of rejecting God. But would you or he recommend an 8-year-old who's dying of leukemia to read Nietzsche? I don't think so. All right, let's move to the criticisms. So the first criticism against the theme that God is dead is that God is not dead. So Nietzsche's claim that God is dead overlooks the enduring faith of billions of people. Billions of people still believe in some type of God who loves them more deeply than any human, a God who grounds rights, objective truth, objective science, and so on much better than any other system, and which Nietzsche's relativism, as Nietzsche himself admits, simply cannot do. So perhaps Nietzsche is writing for the few who do believe that God is dead instead of the many who still don't. And perhaps what he sees coming may not come because enough people believe in that God. So in short, this criticism is that God is not dead for most people. Faith is very much alive, and there are enough people who believe in God to ground the idea of human rights, the intrinsic value of the individual, objectivity, and so on. And this also, let me just add a point here, this also relates to writers like Girard and Chesterton, who argue that Nietzsche doesn't quite understand the deeper truths in Christianity that connects to that very much. Okay, a second criticism comes from atheists instead of theists. So there are atheists like Sam Harris and Peter Singer who are now moral objectivists. They believe in moral facts, whereas Nietzsche did not, right? So they argue that the death of God does not lead to nihilism, and that values like objective morality or human rights or these other things that we thought were valuable, they can be grounded in reason, science, and humanism instead of religion. Now, obviously, that leads to a long discussion and debate, but I just want to point out that there are criticisms from modern atheists, especially on Nietzsche's idea that it leads to nihilism or relativism. Okay, now that you have a sense for Nietzsche's atheism and his first theme of the death of God or the murder of God, we can now move on to the next theme, which is something that often confuses me and many other people because there's various interpretations, and it goes pretty deep. And that theme is called the will to power.